I believe Trump knows he's in trouble. And he's in trouble because he has broken faith with the American people, because he's not kept his word, because increasingly Americans are angry. And look at what was happening at some of the town halls this week in safe Republican districts, where people are angry on everything from the Epstein files to tariffs to worried about, they hate the big ugly bill.
Everybody, welcome back to Trailblaze. I got a very special guest that's joining today. I'm super happy about this. Nayara is not here today, but we are going to have a great one-on-one conversation that I think you're going to enjoy. You've seen her on CNN. She used to host a show on MSNBC. She was the first African-American communications director at the Democratic National Committee, way back when Howard Dean was the DNC chair, and they had this little thing they called the 50-state project. You may have heard of it. It helped Democrats win a lot of states, a lot of seats across the country, and Barack Obama became president of the United States back in those days. But she's been in the private sector. She's worked for the Board of Education. But I know her really as a resident of Hillary land, is what we used to call it. Way back in the old days, in the 1990s, Karen was deputy press secretary for the first lady at the White House. And then she was a senior advisor on the 2016 Hillary campaign for president. She's been all around. You know her. Karen Finney is joining Trailblaze. Karen, thank you for being here.
Hey, it's so good to be with you. And remember, we were in kindergarten in the 90s. I think it's important, people know
it is actually true. And, I'm not going to embarrass either of us by showing what we looked like with our hair back in those days. And I have this great picture of the two of us from back then. And your hair was super curly. That's what that is the only tilt I will give people. She had really curly hair.
And really awesome. Short. It was it was great.
It was awesome. We were children. And I will just tell the story because it's embarrassing for me and helpful for people to know why I like Karen. So I had this really embarrassing moment on the 1992 campaign when I was traveling around with Bill Clinton and I overslept and the airplane left me in Philadelphia. And I had to try to find the Clinton campaign. And so I was trying to figure it out. I got on this airplane. I flew to, I think it was St. Louis, Missouri. I flew to St. Louis. It was the last day of the campaign right before Election Day. Flew to St. Louis, and who picked me up from the airport but my old friend Karen Finney, who picked me up and looked at me with this look of disgust, like disdain, like, what is this man doing who can't get his act together to show up for his job on the last day of the most important presidential campaign of our entire lives? That was me, and Karen rescued me, and she saved my career. So thank you, Karen Finney.
Always, of course. And then
all of it.
The beautiful part of that was 24 hours later, I guess it was, we were partying in Little Rock because
absolutely
Bill Clinton had won, and it was so exciting.
Bill Clinton won. It was super exciting. We all went on to do a bunch of amazing things. Yeah. And I wanted to bring Karen in here and to talk today because we've seen a lot of politics over the course of the last decades, and things have changed a lot. And Karen we went through a little bit of her bio, but she's worked in a lot of places. She's advised a lot of leaders. She's worked on campaigns, causes. People turn to her when they need to get something done and figure out how to navigate the current political moment. And I think what we're all trying to do is figure out how to navigate this political moment, which is probably really, I think, the toughest time of my adult life. I think yours. It's been the toughest time kind of getting through these politics. And so, I really want to start out just asking Karen, as you think about your career, your life, how do you think politics has basically changed over the time you've been involved? I mean, what is it that if you had one or two things that you thought, you knew back when you were 25 and now you think differently about, what would they be?
You mentioned we were going to talk about this. So I've been thinking about it a bit because especially in this moment, Jamal, so as part of my background, I'm biracial. Both my parents grew up in the segregated South. My father passed away in 2016. He was African-American. My mother, white woman, grew up upper middle class in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I mentioned that because I've been asking my mother, have you felt, because this feels to me like we've never seen this before, times have been hard before. She's kind of the person I can ask. And even she says she feels like it's like nothing she's ever seen before. And that's helpful because, despite all of the trailblazing and experiences that we've had, I think a lot of us have been trying to kind of check ourselves to say, well, wait a second, is this really what we think it is? Or is this just perspective? Because obviously the older you get, you have different perspective. I mean, we started with that conversation about working on the Clinton campaign in 82. Part of being 25 years old, you don't know what you don't know. And in some ways that's amazing because it means you go full throttle with your whole heart, and not always aware of, I think part of what I've learned in my career is what's possible, what's not possible, but the importance also of never accepting that something's not possible. If we can build a coalition to make it happen, if we can figure out a way to make it happen. I mean, obviously there are, of course, things that are not possible, but point being, I've learned more about also sort of the art of politics and the way you have to, again, build coalitions and convince people why it's, not just why you think it's a good idea, but talk to people around their interests and understand that their interests are different than your interests. And certainly as someone who grew up biracial, I had a sense of that, but really watching them, I mean, think about the conversation about healthcare. We were having that conversation in 1992. Mm-hmm. And I literally remember a friend of mine asking me, hey, so how long do you think it's going to take for them to do healthcare reform? Because I need to get my knee operation and I'm trying to wait for that to get done.
Wow.
Yes, right?
Wow. I hope that they got it done in 20
Absolutely.
years before it really happened.
Exactly. And yet, I think, so one of the things that I feel like I've seen is our basic needs and concerns of people in this country has not changed. People want to, I think our vision of what the American dream has changed. And one of the things I like to say now is that you have to recognize everybody's got a different version of that dream. I think back when we were starting in politics, it was more of an idea that there was one American dream. And I think now we understand, because in the 90s, we were sort of moving away from the melting pot into the salad and the idea that our multiculturalism and our differences actually are strengths, but also are a part of what make this country so unique. It's also part of what makes politics doing politics in a party where you have lots of different interests a lot harder.
That's true.
And that's something that I think it's funny. I've sort of been saying, one of the things I think that the conservatives are learning now that they have, they won kind of different sectors in 2024. It's like, no, you've got to deliver different things to people because they have different expectations. So I think, obviously the biggest change, two big changes in politics, I would say. Number one, it's not just that the polarization, but I think there's also been a calcification and a change in that. Politics was always nasty and dirty. And I think it's important to remember that. I mean, I go back and read about things from the 1800s, right? Where back then, some of these, how dare you, sir, right? Sort of seemed so tame.
They would fight with canes.
Right.
Right.
But that it's really changed in terms of we're so much, it feels like even more so than in the 90s. And certainly even when I started when I was at the DNC and, even in the early aughts, it felt like there were obviously the far left and the far left, but part of there was still kind of enough of an ability to have a conversation. I mean, there were people who were on the other side of the aisle. We may vehemently disagree, but we were able to have conversations. And it does feel that we're more in a situation where we don't just look at someone as being, having different values or different politics, but then it's, we're making character judgments. And and I think that's what's a challenge about that is, and where the place where I hope we get back to at some point is, I got into politics and government because
why did you start this? I mean, it's been a journey.
I wanted
to
help my country. I believed in it as service. And I think that I believe there are a lot of people who still, that is why they do it. And that's got to become, I want that to be front and center. I worked in an inner city facility for teenage girls who were pregnant. They were incarcerated. My first job out of college.
Oh, this is good. I never knew this. I never knew this.
Oh my gosh, these girls were rough. So this was like,
where were you? What city were you in?
This was outside of downtown LA. It was like between downtown LA and Pasadena. Mm-hmm. And this facility was public-private, and these girls they were all pregnant or had babies. So
so teenage moms or young moms,
teenage mothers or teenage girls with hormone, like all kind of hormones.
Yes, of course. Yes.
And they're incarcerated. And this facility was unique because it was the one place where girls could be with their baby, basically.
Oh, yeah.
And part of the facility, there was the deal was they had to live there. They had parenting classes. They had school. I worked in the school as a teaching assistant. They had to do group therapy, individual therapy, in some instances, family therapy. So
like a wraparound, bunch of services. Yeah.
But the challenge, what I saw with these young girls, and this was in the early 90s where, when I remember the explosion of gang culture and really understand, coming to really understand, and the girls themselves, many of them could be as lethal as the men, but the police hadn't figured that out yet. Right. Yeah. But so many of these girls, it was, what was so heartbreaking to me. I mean, they didn't know what to think. I was 22 years old. I had my own car. I clearly lived somewhere else. These were kids who didn't expect to live past 16, 17, 18. These were girls who believed that their greatest value was the ability to have a baby because that creates a new gang member. And when you hear a 13-year-old say that to you, I mean, it was humbling.
Yeah. Wow.
It was so humbling. And unfortunately, what I saw in the system at the time was a system that was making it harder for them, even if they did all the right things. When they got out, it was that much harder for them to go on with their lives because a lot of these young girls had come out of really horrible family situations. But if you put them back in that situation with all the same stressors and an infant, how are you setting them up for success? And these kids had all been classified as special education.
Yeah, that happens. Yeah,
right.
And
from there, my interest was in education, and I liked. Bill Clinton had been dealing in Arkansas with gang culture, and I appreciated the way that he talked about these kids not as evil people, but as, what's our job to help them? And that was, for me, my father was a civil rights attorney. My mom was in labor. So that was how I felt like, what's our role in trying to help these young women? So again, I saw, working in the White House, working in government as public service, as how do we help enact policies that are going to help people? And as you know, in those early, in the 90s, one of the things, there weren't a lot of people that looked like us at those higher levels, helping to be sometimes just in those rooms to share our experiences that were
different. It's interesting you talk about this because for me I remember thinking I was a disillusioned young black man in the early 90s, right? I was listening to Public Enemy and Fight the Power and all that, and I really didn't think that American politics had much to offer. kind of people who look like me. And so I remember when I saw Bill Clinton came to my college campus. I was at Morehouse, and he came during the Georgia primary, and somebody handed me a flyer and said, this candidate's going to be in King Chapel. And I was like, well, let me just go see what he has to say. Right. And so I went and listened to him, and I was like, wow, this white guy is actually saying things that make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the economy, and he was talking about, getting people jobs, and he was talking about racism. He would say, like, we have to stop, fighting each other unless we're going to actually make progress. We got to figure out how we do that together. And I thought, wow, here's somebody who's taking on these things at least creatively, and, wanted to get involved with that. And I think that there was what I decided at some moment, I don't remember exactly when, but I do remember being a part of protests. This was like Rodney King era. I remember with Stacey Abrams, because she was on campus and she was leading protests, back in those days. And I remember thinking, maybe I don't just have to be outside protesting. I can be inside, kind of help make things better, kind of at the table. Like, instead of arguing from outside the room, somebody's got to be inside the room to help fix things. And so I remember making that shift around that age. And that was, around the time when I was in politics. And I was like, oh, wait, okay. Campaigns, like, oh, wait a minute. I have a chance to really go inside. Maybe I should do that. Maybe I can make a difference. Yeah.
And I think the key too, as you know, is it's also a matter when you're inside, how do you stay connected to the things that brought you there, right? And obviously working in the Clinton administration, it was a phenomenal, if I set aside, scandals, whatever you want, what a phenomenal experience as a young woman, particularly working for Hillary, because in those days, so my parents divorced when I was young. So I lived with my mom most of my life. She was a working mother my whole life. That was new for a lot of families. And, I remember that when Hillary, first of all, Hillary Land, to be around, have a whole staff of smart women. Our chief of staff, a woman named Maggie Williams, was a Black woman.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how grateful I feel for having had that experience, because it happened at such a young age. It didn't occur to me that you couldn't have that. Right. And actually and certainly there were the dynamics of that there always are, the presidents,
the boys, go ahead and say it. The boys,
but also the territorial stuff that is in every administration, right? Between the West Wing and the East Wing and the OEOB and all those. But, that was really fun. It was phenomenal. And the fact that Hillary was so committed to women and girls, but I remember having a conversation with a reporter, and this just, I didn't fully appreciate at the time as much as I do now what a trailblazer both she was and her tenure as first lady was. I remember a reporter had called, and I was telling him the schedule for the day. And I said, wow, so she, there was a healthcare meeting in the morning. You saw she testified on the Hill. There was a meeting this afternoon we had an upcoming Nelson Mandela state dinner. Mm-hmm. And then she both she actually and the president, as a lot of leaders who have kids, that, the Bushes did this as well. And we're trying to be sort of home, as it were, for dinner.
Yeah. Right.
So I was
because Chelsea back then was 13, middle school. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I explained this, and this reporter says, you expect me to believe that Hillary Clinton sat in a meeting about, tablecloths? And I said, excuse me? I said, does your wife work? Yes. And I said, and so what does she do all day? So I imagine she gets up, she goes to work, she helps take care of your kids, she cooks the meals. And if you're having company over for dinner, she's going to think about what the meal should be and making sure the house looks good. And then is helping your kids with their homework. And this guy kind of like, I said, so don't, I said, you don't even know what your wife, think about how women are living our lives right now. I said, millions of American women, whether they work inside the home or outside the home, are juggling all kinds of responsibilities, because it was such a sexist response to think that just because this woman who is, brilliant attorney and can do policy couldn't also do, take care of her kids and make a meal. So that was a eye-opening part of the experience as well early in my career, sort of realizing the kinds of cultural expectations around women and our roles in society.
So, Karen, we've heard a lot about your background, and I think it's amazing. And what the through line seems to me is this commitment to women and girls that seems to keep showing up. Also, education. In this moment, post Dobbs, Epstein files are on the docket.
Yeah.
We've seen what's happened to a couple of women, nominees for president. Just how are you thinking about the sort of future of women and girls in politics? Having seen what you've seen over the course of your career, where we are now.
I really believe that women are essential to our political system because we just bring a different lived experience, different lens to things. I mean, that sounds obvious, but it's true. And, one of the things that's been interesting throughout my career that I've seen, 20 years ago, when we were first trying to get women elected governor, right? It was trying to or even women elected to Congress, right? We told women they were trying to show they could be like men.
Mm.
And yet one of the big things that's changed is you now have, one of the things that voters love about women is we're good listeners. And it's part of why so many women get elected to legislative bodies, because voters actually believe women are good at bringing people together, listening, and helping find consensus. And so, I've even seen men now start their campaigns with a listening tour.
Yes.
To show that they're good listeners, right? And so I just really believe I think that's a positive development in our politics. And I'm, despite the heartbreak, I worked with Hillary in her 2000 Senate campaign, was broken, obviously, after 2016. But even, in 2024, think about what Kamala was able to accomplish in 107 days. She actually got 10 million more votes than Hillary got. Wow. Right. So that tells me America is getting more used to and comfortable with the idea of a woman as our executive of the country. In the same way, I worked on Stacey Abrams' 2018 gubernatorial race. And I learned a lot there about what do people want out of executive leaders versus, the sort of legislative leadership. So in this moment, though, so that's a really important piece.
It's interesting you say this, because for me, I'm going to say something, maybe it's a little bit controversial, but as you know, I worked for Vice President Harris.
Yeah.
One of the things we have not had yet is a woman candidate for president who was an executive, who came from an executive position, right? Whether she was a governor, a mayor, a CEO, a general. Like, we haven't had that at that level yet. So I wonder, there's a part of me that just wonders is if there's a way of communicating, there's like a vibe, right, to an executive. And maybe that's the thing that we've been missing so far is one of those women executives. We have more governors and mayors and senators, senators, CEOs. Maybe one of them will be the one that actually crashes through that barrier.
I think that's a really important point, Jamal, actually, because one of the things for a long time, the pathway to being a governor was being an AG. Why? Because to be governor, people want to know, there's two areas, right? It's economic and security are the two areas where women tend to struggle with voters to prove themselves. But if you've been the attorney general, that is a law enforcement credential. I think that was a huge benefit to the vice president. The national security piece, obviously, when you're running for president, it's not just public safety security. It's, the global threats we're talking about now are really different. So I do think a woman governor may be the person who ends up being our first female president. But, in this moment, though, I actually, as much as I am on a daily basis feeling overwhelmed, part of what gives me hope is I do believe that a couple of things are actually happening. Number one, I think people have gotten the best civics lesson we could have ever expected, because they're realizing that people who work for the government are VA doctors. They are cancer researchers. They are people who live in their communities, or they are the people at the local social security office. They're people who do work to help make government work for people, right? It
Yes.
goes back to something we were talking about. It's about service. So many of these folks are people my dad was a civil rights attorney who worked for the government. Similar to what you were saying. Why? Because he felt like after being on the outside of the system, let me try to go inside and be part of helping to make change. He could have gone to a firm and made a lot of money. A lot of these folks could, but they believe in service. So I'm still encouraged with the fact that we still have people who feel that commitment. And I think the American people are learning more about what people do. And I think it's really important we continue to help to tell that story. And the other thing I think is being provided in this moment is people are realizing what they don't want. Ironically, so many of the things, I can agree. I think we all can agree. We don't want violent criminals who are here illegally on our streets.
Right.
But more people now believe and agree, including Republicans. There's increased support for comprehensive immigration reform because people are realizing, well, wait a second, the woman that's been, serving me my coffee at the coffee shop for the last 10 years, who's trying to get a green card, that's not the person who should be in these horrible detention centers, right?
Right.
And by the way, it means those violent criminals are still on our streets. So I think I hope that part of what's happening is our values are being challenged. And this is one of the things I will add to.
Just look at what's happening with the Constitution. You think about the president attacking the First Amendment with freedom of speech with universities. He's going after the Fifth Amendment with right to due process because people are being exported around the world. The Sixth Amendment where you have the right to counsel. The 14th Amendment, right to birthright citizenship, right? Like all these sort of fundamental things we all assumed were answered questions about our society are all being tested.
And it's really interesting. I attended a conference a couple of weeks ago called the States Forum. And some of the research that was presented there, they did one of the organizations did a broad survey. And what they found is actually people agree when we talk about our shared values, the language, the promise that is in the Constitution. And I think it's important to call it a promise because we're not there yet. We're still a work in progress. But people largely believe that's what America's supposed to be. And so that tells me part of what's important in this moment, and I've always been a strong believer in values-based messaging.
Yes.
If we talk about our values, if we continue to have those conversations, I think whether it's a woman, I think that's the future. That's how our country moves to the next chapter. And I know one of the things you and I have talked about, Jamal, this idea of the Reconstruction, right? We've been through many call this a third Reconstruction. And part of that process is a bit of a moving back. But sometimes I think you have to have that pushback to then say, well, wait a second, that's not what we wanted, to then move forward. So
it's true. It's true. It happens in our personal lives. It happens in our political lives. I mean, sometimes you do have to take a step back. I want to pick your brain on one more thing before we let you go.
Yeah.
Because this is in the news, right? This is something that everybody is talking about right now. And we think about how it is we're going to hold on to some things, reclaim our political power, and have something to build on the new things in a post-Trump world. And one of those things is Democrats winning the Congress back. But what's making Democrats nervous, and obviously the president knows this because he's being very forthright about his challenge to the state of Texas, which is go find me 5 seats, redistrict to find 5 seats. The state of Texas, they've redistricted the map. They've going after minority voters. And on Sunday, we saw 50 plus Democrats leave the state and go to places like Chicago and New York and other Democratic strongholds to stop a quorum. And so just, as people are paying attention, you need 100 people to show up in the state legislature in Texas in order to have a quorum. There are 88 Republicans. So if the Democrats don't show up, they can't actually do any business. But now we know that the Attorney General and others are willing to go after those Democrats or try to go after them. It's questionable whether or not it's actually possible. But I just want to pick your brain on this moment where we're seeing what we're seeing happen in Texas, and what will this mean for, should we redistrict? Are Democrats going to be able to win the House back? What's going to happen?
So it's a great question. A couple of things. One, it's an example of what we've talked about in terms of the calcification, not just the polarization. because we're seeing this happen. I mean, when in our history has a president told a state, find me 5 more seats? Sounds a
Right.
lot like find me 11,000 more votes, doesn't it?
Exactly. We've heard this before from this
I
man.
was like, wait a second. Or, let's hide the Stormy Daniels stuff until I get through this election, right?
Right. Right.
But the fact that the conservatives in the state are willing to go with it is very troubling, because nonpartisan, these maps should all be nonpartisan. We know that. You can say there's both sidesism, what have you. So, couple of things. Number one, I think it's so important that these Democrats not only left the state, but they're in all different parts of the country trying to help spread the word and wake Americans up to why this matters. We're talking about our values. We're talking about our Constitution. Representation is one of our most critical. Voters are supposed to pick our leaders, and those leaders have to be accountable to their voters. And when you over gerrymander, when you create too many of these safe seats, then you have people who are not accountable. So I think a couple of things are going to have to happen, because the reporting that we've seen today suggests it's not just going to be Texas. Republicans are looking at other states. Obviously, Democrats are talking about what states. That feels like it could end up being mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
I hope that we have more Americans stepping up and saying to their members, we don't want you doing this. Right? I think we need to be building a movement in Texas to say to people, the Republicans in the legislature, if you do this, we'll vote you out.
Yeah.
Because people have to feel, that's the thing about politics. There has to be some accountability somewhere.
But don't the Democrats have to push back if they do this in Texas and try to recapture those seats in some of those other big states?
Of course. And look, I think you've got Governor Hochul ready to do it. There's several states, but my point, what we've been hearing today is that there are other states where Republicans are looking. So who knows? So it's like,
it just goes back and forth, the ping pong. Right. Yeah.
But the truth is, here's the most important thing I think we should say. The reason this is happening is because I believe Trump knows he's in trouble. And he's in trouble because he has broken faith with the American people, because he's not kept his word, because increasingly Americans are angry. And look at what was happening at some of the town halls this week in safe Republican districts, where people are angry on everything from the Epstein files to tariffs to worried about, they hate the big ugly bill. And so I do think Democrats have to push back. I also think Democrats have to do something, Jamal, you and I have been talking about since the 90s. Right now, they need to be spending money in all communities. It goes back to the 50-state strategy. We've got to be showing up all over the country. And I believe the chairman is putting money into the state parties. We've got to be making our case for our values and how that connects to issues everywhere now, not 6 months before the election. Because one of the things, some of the studies I've looked at.
This is so important.
Is, Republicans, if you look at digital spending, they are doing persuasion in the off years at almost the same level.
They never stopped.
Karen,
they haven't stopped since Election Day.
Correct. And we stop and then we come back. Literally I have a report that shows when Democrats started doing digital spending to start persuasion, they were already at mobilization. Right?
Right.
So they've already been persuading for 2 years. So now they're saying this is why you got to vote. This is right. And so this is this is an important opportunity for us to be talking with people about why their vote matters. We've got to fight the fight on Texas. We got to keep talking about the issues that are really affecting people. And I believe that the members have been trying to do that. We've got to, do a lot of things at the same time. And I think I know smarter legal minds than you and me. I'm not a lawyer.
Neither am I. Right.
but we can sound good when we need to.
Exactly. Give me a typewriter, a
right.
computer, and a typewriter and a pencil.
ChatGPT.
Whatever your medium it is, whatever era, I'll take it. And
but you know, from a legal perspective, I think they do need to figure out what other ways can we fight back in Texas, and then make sure, to your point, in these other states, we're ready to go with, because maybe we do just have to have a fight to the, you know, this fighting it out state by state. I think that would be terrible for democracy, but I hope it underscores the point for people that, you know, this is happening because they are trying to change the rules because they don't believe they can win honestly.
Yeah. So the very, very last question. So this all seems like we are moving away from that old dictum that we heard from Tip O'Neill that all politics is local. In many ways, it seems like politics is becoming incredibly more national, certainly at the federal level. And is that true? Or do these members of Congress, senators have to go back home? Does it matter? Do the local issues matter anymore? Or is it all just red team versus blue team?
I think the local issues do matter. I mean, look at, as much as I hate it, look at what Murkowski did around that horrible budget, right? She was like, well, I'm going to make sure my people are taken care of on Medicaid.
Yeah.
Right. And that's her job. I don't like it big picture, but, you know, she's trying to protect her people.
Yeah.
And I think that, to my mind, is part of what I hope people I think Trump is trying to nationalize it, right? So that it's all about consolidating power. At the same time, all these individuals, they are still accountable to the people who elected them. And so I think as people are I mean, part of the reason I think you're seeing even Republicans having to say they're going to be on board with releasing some version of the Epstein files is they're hearing about it. And by the way, I do want to say this, Jamal, because I think it's so important because we don't talk about it enough. You know, this Epstein story, yeah, there is the part of it that's about Donald Trump and the Republican conservatives and MAGA world, you know, these conspiracy theorists, many of whom thought they were going to, you know, get some Democrats by getting the files. But there's also a human story here.
Yeah.
There's at least 1,000 girls who were assaulted and trafficked.
Yep.
And we have to remember them too in this process. And I actually think their voices are going to help keep it human in the same way that the voices of people in communities around this country can help to keep politics local and keep politicians accountable, because that was the original idea, that you're supposed to be accountable to the people, not just the party. And, you know, look, in the last 25 years, we've seen that balance kind of tilting a bit, but it's a moment where I hope we, the people, can pull it back and say, wait a second, no, you're still accountable to us. And if you won't do the job, we'll find somebody who can.
All right. There you go. Karen Finney, thank you for joining Trailblaze, because you are a trailblazer.
Oh, thank you, my dear. Thank you.
All right. Good to talk to you. And we will talk to you all next week. Nayyera Haq will be back. So all you guys were looking for Nayyera. She will be back next week, and we will catch up with the news next Tuesday. See you then.